Major breaking news this morning coming from Louder with Crowder, Steven Crowder's organization. The manifesto of the Nashville shooter has been leaked. The document is full of anti-white hatred using many leftist critical theory talking points. This is a big story, and right now we are hearing the police spokesperson is refusing to confirm the authenticity of the manifesto. However, based on what we have already heard from law enforcement, it would appear that this document obtained by Louder with Crowder, Steven Crowder, it matches the description of what we were told. Now, there's a big debate over whether or not the FBI should have released this much, much sooner. Many lawsuits. There are some stories where, in fact, the victims' families did not want the document released. But now we know what many people widely speculated and believed to be the case either way. The individual in Nashville who killed several children and faculty members was motivated by anti-white hatred and presumably leftist political ideology. I am not making a prescriptive argument as to what should be done, and I am not trying to argue that the left is more or less right now. However, in this segment, we'll go through this reporting. I am not going to be showing the document in full. It will be lightly blurred because there's other images which may be graphic as I go through these stories. And I will stress, go watch the clip and listen to Steven Crowder's breakdown of this. He's got it in full detail. Of course, he gives his opinion. I'm going to give my breakdown in a bigger picture sense as to what we're seeing in the United States with left versus right. There are a list of other manifestos that have been released, and there is a story I have where the FBI did release a different manifesto pertaining to Islamic Jihad. I think there's a big argument about whether or not the FBI should or shouldn't have held this document, but I think it's fair to say that there is a growing extremism in this country being ignored by the establishment and by law enforcement. I believe specifically because the FBI is a partisan political organization. And, it may be that there is some nuanced argument they're not telling us, fine, but I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I will personally express my bias as the Timcast studios were swatted or some type of swatting about 15 times last year, 15 times. There has been no justice, no communication. Law enforcement has basically ghosted us on this one. So when we hear these stories about the FBI hunting down the wrong people as it pertains to January 6th or the Capitol Police participating as well, I have to wonder why they have put so much into tracking down who may have put a garage door pull rope in a NASCAR garage and ignored serious acts of far left terror that have been happening all over this country. Now, while we look at this story, I think it's fair to point out, I will show you many of the manifestos that have come out from right-wing motivated individuals were released by them before engaging in their extremist actions. And as it pertains to this manifesto, it's not quite the same as many other manifestos. This is 3 pages. We'll break down what's in it. There are many documents obtained by the FBI they do not release. That being said, I'm going to show you instances of far left terror, sedition, and extremism that is ignored by the corporate press, which gives credence to the thought that the FBI actively seeks to suppress or avoid or cover up instances where the far left is engaging in extremism. Now, this past week, we had Stephen Marsh on the Culture War podcast. He is the author of the book, The Next Civil War, and the latest novel he co-wrote with Andrew Yang called The Last Election. He said that he believes the right has more seditionists than the left. I asked him what his metric was, and he said court cases. I'm going to show you and break this down. That is not an accurate assessment of what is really going on in this country. But there's a lot to be said. First, let's get to the breaking news from the Post-Millennial. They say, a leaked manifesto reveals the Nashville trans school shooter had a violent hatred of, quote, little crackers with white privilege that were murdered. First obtained and released by the Louder with Crowder conservative YouTube show, the 3-page handwritten document shows Audrey, also known as Aiden Hale, meticulously planned their last moments and the mass school shooting at the Covenant School on March 27th. 3 young children and 3 school staff were killed before Hale, 28, was shot by the police. The manifesto, written in a spiral notebook, has various screeds and thoughts scrawled down by pen. Death Day, Hale wrote on the page, with the drawing of a target reticle on a pistol, along with the date 3/27/23. The day has finally come, Hale wrote. I can't believe it's here. Don't know how I was able to get this far, but here I am. I'm a little nervous, but excited too. Been excited for the past 2 weeks. Hale continued, there were several times I could have been caught, especially back in the summer of 2021. None of that matters now. I am almost an hour and 7 minutes away. Can't believe I am doing this, but I'm ready. I hope my victims are. Now, I will also add that many of the writings are actually using slurs. So I want to make sure that's clear. Can't believe I'm doing this. I hope my victims aren't. Hale later prayed to God in the manifesto to help her in the mass shooting. God, let my wrath take over my anxiety. It might be 10 minutes tops. It might be 3 to 7. It's going to go quick. I hope I have a high death count. Horrifying statements. Hale then wrote, ready to die, Nana, and signed it Audrey. Now, that's Hale's dead name, as it were. Reportedly, Audrey Hale was going by the name Aiden and a trans man identifying as a man. On another page, Hale wrote a detailed day schedule with a post-it calmly asking lunch may be around 11 to 1 p.m. Hale's day began at 6:30 and ran through getting dressed, breakfast, and what to do with the stuffed animals and possessions. At 9:30, Hale was to pack up special belongings in backpack. By 10:20, Hale was to gear up and set up guns in trunk and get out vest with magazines. Hale was armed with a handgun, a rifle, and a pistol modded to handle like a rifle. Very interesting. Hale also wrote about making a final videotape on the schedule. This has not been released by police or confirmed to even exist. Hale detailed a plan to leave for Covenant by 11:35. Now, I think a few things I want to mention that are very important is the statements of anti-white sentiment, crackers, and white privilege is absolute leftist ideology. Now, again, I will stress, someone having leftist ideology does not mean they're a mass shooter. Someone being trans does not mean they're a mass shooter or violent or anything. I think mental health issues are the core component here. You can believe whatever you want politically, but someone doing this is clearly not working. Their brain is not working. Now, I do think we tend to see a high degree of violence from the left due to, I believe, mental issues and just you have a high population density in cities. So you're going to have ideology spread. And if you have someone who is mentally unwell and then they're given an extremist ideology, they can be set on a dangerous path. I don't believe people who have ideologies are so tactless that they just do these things, but it is important to bring up that these are motivating factors for people like this. Now, there are a bunch of stories that I think are very important to go over when it comes to, say, the autonomous zones that we've seen throughout the country, the shootings that took place there. I believe this shows that an argument can be made. The left has substantially more seditionists who are ready to engage in extremist action. That is not to say anybody wants anything like this to happen. In fact, I think the problem we're facing right now is the FBI is taking this too lightly. They are not doing enough to publicly assure people that they are stopping extremism wherever it may be. I'll get a little personal as I'll break it down, but let's read a little bit more. One of the pages mentioning opening fire, that it was time to die, mentions killing kids and crackers and white privilege, blaming and expressing those crackers with fancy private schools and khakis and sports backpacks and daddy's Mustangs. F you little ishes, also referring to them with homophobic slurs. One interesting component of the story was the checking of security in the parking lot. I don't know if they have this one written out. Let me double check. I thought they did have this written. I guess they don't. One component in the manifesto was saying they were going to check security. Now, a lot of people are upset because gun-free zones have a higher rate of. We got to be careful here. Mass shooters are stopped less in gun-free zones. That's an important thing to point out. Now, we have this tweet from Mary Margaret Olahan, who is senior reporter for Daily Signal, saying, Nashville PD spokeswoman just refused to confirm to me whether this was the legit manifesto. I want to pull up this wiki from the Nashville school shooting and bring up the reactions and the arguments over the writings to give you a description. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, police officers collected what was initially described as a manifesto authored by Hale. David Rausch, the director of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, later called the descriptor a mischaracterization, describing the writings as a document detailing Hale's plan and journal-type rantings. The MNPD denied requests for the files by the Tennessean, and State Senator Tom Gardenhire, who argued along with some open government advocates that Tennessee's public records laws required the release of the writings. Metro Nashville Council member Courtney Johnston said the FBI had told her that the documents would not be released because they detailed a blueprint of total destruction and could inspire other shooters. Several Tennessee politicians and public figures, including Elon Musk and Trump Jr., publicly called for the release of the documents. Senator Bill Hagerty said, "I think people do deserve to know what took place and what was in the mind of this sick person that committed these heinous murders." House Republican Caucus Chairman Jeremy Fison attributed the lack of legislative response to the shootings to the delayed release, saying, "We cannot possibly address this horrific situation until we know what was in the manifesto." The important thing, and the reason I bring this up, is it was described as a manifesto, but later said to be journal type rantings, and a description of the plan. What Steven Crowder has released is just that. I will stress right now, the spokesperson for the police is saying they will not confirm this, but I think it's fair to lean towards this is likely the manifesto. That being said, we don't know for sure 100%. I don't know that Crowder has released what their source is, nor do I think they necessarily will. But I believe it is. We try to be careful. Nothing's absolute. I would say I lean very heavily, 90+%. This is likely a legitimate manifesto, as we have already heard time and time again. There are people in law enforcement, people who wanted this released, who had access to it and images of it. It takes only a single individual to anonymously send that to Crowder, and that seems to be the simple solution here. It would be much more conspiratorial that someone fabricated this and then sent it to Crowder. Thus, I will state, it seems to be the case that this is very much so the manifesto. Now, I want to talk to you first about gun control as a very quick aside. There was a viral video where this woman said banning weapons of war on the street isn't about infringing on you, it's about protecting you. And she said, for all those who need to hear this, you aren't special, you aren't going to be the hero who saves everyone, you literally would not be able to defend yourself. Now, I bring this up because it's factually incorrect, and the video has 5 million views. It went viral just this past week. And I have this community notes to which I respite oopsie daisies to her. Community Notes points out in a 2022 study of mass shooting incidents, the Crime Prevention Research Institute found that civilians stopped at least 34.4% of active shooter incidents from 2014 to 2021. Excluding gun-free zones, where civilians would not be lawfully armed, the number increased to 51% too. So, to simplify, when they tracked all mass shootings and excluded gun-free zones, civilians stopped 51%. Now, I strongly recommend people explore their rights, do what's legal, get training, insurance, highly recommend insurance, but I recommend getting training and being armed. Where legal, where possible. The reason for this is quite simple. Just to get a little ideological as we move into the next phase of the segment, the next portion of the segment. Centralized security does not prevent the granular, the micro. It may help prevent the macro, which is the argument made by many on the left, but it does not prevent the micro. What I am saying is, when you argue for banning a certain thing, you may prevent a flat percentage. It could be 7%. And they argue that's a great number, but it doesn't prevent the granular that they use as their arguments. In this instance, a mass shooter could be stopped by someone who is armed. Law enforcement is not going to be able to respond to direct incidents. That is to say, I do believe that the presence of police in areas will reduce crime. However, if a criminal approaches you to commit a crime, there's no cop around you. Good luck. What are you going to do? Call the cops? It's not going to help you. But I always recommend people be armed and explore their Second Amendment rights. But let's talk about where we currently are in this country and the bias that I think is leading us towards very serious ruin. For one, we know for a fact the law enforcement actions being taken against Donald Trump are extremely hyper-partisan. We know that law enforcement and intelligence agencies withheld information on the Hunter Biden laptop. The bias is palpable. On May 29th, Donald Trump was forced into an emergency underground bunker as far left extremists threw firebombs at the White House grounds and actually set a portion of the White House grounds on fire and set fire to St. John's Church across the street. The president being forced into a bunker, I believe, is very alarming. And what does CNN say? Briefly taken to underground bunker. Definitely downplaying this. When the establishment media and law enforcement continually downplay this, we've got ourselves a very serious problem. Now, to the argument about the release of this manifesto, this is certainly not an exhaustive list of manifestos, but I did pull up a list of manifestos, and I will point out we currently do not have the release of many manifestos relating to perceived, I don't know what you would call it, race-based anti-LGBT or anti-left incidents. So for one man has 3 manifestos unreleased to the public. And then you have Audrey Hill, which was not yet released. However, when you look back at this and you wonder why there's so many manifestos pertaining to nationalist or eco-fascist or ethno-nationalist, why these manifestos are released, it's because the individual releases them themselves. So there's a big difference. However, I will point this out. The FBI did release details of a manifesto of the UC Merced stabbing suspect. This was related to support for ISIL or ISIS. So that being said, there is still a lot to cover. As many people are concerned about what's going on, I think it's fair to point out. I will say it this way. On Friday, I had a conversation with Stephen Marsh, the author of The Next Civil War and The Last Election. I think he's a good dude. I think he's got some very bad views, very, very bad views. And I think he sees a lot of things correctly, but he has a very hard leftist bias. He believes that he is not biased. He is simply a journalist. But he said he believes that there are more seditionists on the right than the left. I asked him what was his metric for believing this, to which he responded, court cases. Sure. Here's Oregon Live. Seattle will pay $3.65 million to settle suit over autonomous zone protest disruption to Capitol Hill. What is more seditious? A handful of guys in the middle of nowhere who are talking about how they hate the government and have guns, or far left extremists in several cities who actually seized property and in the instance of, say Seattle, shut down a police station. In the instance of Portland, firebombed a federal building and actually killed many people. This is a horrifying story from the Seattle Times. Everybody down. What happened at the shooting that killed a teenager and led to the CHOPS shutdown? It is reported that hundreds of rifle rounds were unloaded into a white SUV. Why? Because the far left took over this territory and there was no law enforcement. So when you come to me and say, oh, but the right is the scary thing and the right is the bad, I just simply say, look at this one from the Post-Millennial. Shooting near George Floyd's autonomous zone in Minneapolis on the eve of the Chauvin trial. It was reported that a man on top of a building had a rifle. I believe it was on a tripod. This autonomous zone taken over by far left extremists, lawlessness. The George Floyd riots in 2020 were the most serious riots we had seen in this country in 50 years. So you say there are more seditionists on the right. One area where I did agree with Stephen March is that if we do devolve into a civil war, the shot heard around the world will likely come from the right, meaning it will be a right, colloquially aligned group that will take action. Stephen Marsh agreed, but I think he agreed for the wrong reasons. What I'm pointing out is every day, people in this country who are attuned to what's going on with the news and the media and politics, well, these people are deeply concerned about far left violence and extremism because it seems to be ubiquitous in big cities, especially with the autonomous zones and the far left riots. We saw people in D.C. during Trump's inauguration in 2017 setting things on fire, torching vehicles, setting fires in the streets, smashing windows. What happened? Well, the police did arrest several hundred of them. They ended up being having charges dismissed, and the city paid them millions. On January 6th, there was a riot. In fact, I have no problem saying some of these individuals were engaged in terrorism. I had this discussion with Cenk Uygur. I pointed out if the far left storms a building threatening people, like when they did with Riley Gaines, saying that they're going to harm or kill, that is to invoke terror. That is terrorism. And Cenk asked me, what about January 6th? And I said, yes, absolutely. Now, the issue with January 6th, as with the issue with many of these protests, not every single person is doing this. Some people are the banality of evil. Some people are bumbling dotards. as per January 6th, yeah, people were fighting cops, smashing their way through, and they were screaming very horrible things about what they were going to do to some politicians. Those people were trying to invoke terror in politicians. On the other side, however, many people had no idea what was going on and were actually let in the building. Some of the people in the front did not scream for violence. Some of these individuals offered to help police, but they were rioting. I think bringing this distinction up is very simple. When it comes to the autonomous zone, was everyone who was there, who was planting flowers, a terrorist? Not at all. No. The point is this. We rarely see people on the right do these things. Now, I think it's fair to say there are right-wing militias and organizations, but what are they doing? They're in the middle of nowhere doing nothing. What's the far left doing? They've been taking over parts of cities. I am not trying to say that you should fear one or the other. In fact, I believe that if this does break out into civil war, it'll probably start with the right. There is a strong probability it starts with the left, but I believe it's more likely to start with the right. And I'll give you an example. The far left wants subversion. I'll break it down for you. The far left want subversion. They want control, but they're chaos. They don't care that laws are broken. They support laws being broken. So when law enforcement breaks down, they revel in it. All there is chaos. No organized group, fighting the state, or fighting each other. Fighting amongst themselves, for sure. A video emerged in the past couple of weeks, which resulted in an injunction. A video of I believe it's called a backhoe or a backloader, lifting up razor wire to allow hundreds of illegal immigrants to break into the United States, forcing their way past our border barriers in violation of the law. The federal government did that. Local government won't do anything. There is no authority for the federal government to do this. In fact, a judge told them to stop. So people have witnessed the federal government breaking the law. CBP agents with smiles on their faces gleefully breaking United States law. When law enforcement agents begin breaking the law, what happens? We've known about this for a long time. There are border militias, and now there's more active ones. This is why I say it's more likely to come from the right, because I think you're more likely to see a group of militia in the South being like, we have a law in this country. The book says this. It must be upheld. And you, sir, are a criminal wearing a badge. And what happens? Sooner or later, these things clash. Now, to be fair, I think that's why it's more likely, because the far left is just chaos. But to be fair, the only reason things did not pop off is because law enforcement is not triggering a fight with the far left. That is to say, with the autonomous zones, with the far left opening fire. I got shot at in Ferguson. Cops were getting shot at. The government does not take an organized stance against these groups, hunt them down. They don't. And so it does not lead to any kind of civil war. You get the point? If the far left can open an autonomous zone and the cops do nothing about it, and then they start killing people and the cops do nothing about it, you can't have a civil war. It requires two factions fighting. The reality is many in law enforcement are covering up for or aligned with the ideals of the far left, which is why the government is pushing DEI, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be more information emerging from this, and we will learn more as the time goes on. But my shout out to Steven Crowder and the Louder with Crowder crew for some of the best journalism we've seen in a while. Simply getting access to these documents and publishing them is a tremendous feat of journalism. We'll see who reports on it, and we'll definitely have more to talk about this later tonight on Timcast IRL. So stay tuned. Next segment will be coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel, and we will see you all then.